Hey guys, welcome back to Garage Noise, where we teach you how to build your skill and increase your knowledge about paint and body repair. Help you do your own DIY projects at home. And today we're going to tackle a common issue that happens on a lot of vehicles, and that's a door ding and paint chip. So let's take a look at it. So this is a project you might have seen on the channel before. We painted this entire vehicle. Well, it ended up getting a door ding in a parking lot or something of that nature, and it chipped the paint and scratched it. So what we're going to tackle today is we're going to show you how to repair this. So the customer has stripped this door down, removed the door handle, and gotten it ready for us to repair. What we're going to do is we're going to repair this chip. Once we have this repaired and primered, we're going to blend the color here and then clear this entire panel. The purpose of that is we don't want to get color out to the edge of here. Even though we're using the same color, we're painting on a different day, and there could be variances in the shade of that color. So we want to keep the color as far away from the edge of the adjacent panels as possible. So what we'll do is we'll blend the color and then clear the entire panel. So what we've done is we've used 600 grit sandpaper to machine sand the entire door. And what that's going to do is going to prep out that surface for clear coat. Now the reason we use 600 is because 600 scratches will not show through the clear. So if we don't put any color here, we put clear coat over top of it, you will not be able to see 600 grit scratches underneath it. The clear will adhere to it properly so it doesn't peel down the road. Okay, so let's tackle this chip. We'll get into it. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to feather edge this chip out just a little bit. Now there's a little ding here, so we're going to need to use a little bit of filler on this. We're going to feather edge this chip where the hard paint line is and set out just a bit. And to do that, we're going to use 180 grit sandpaper. Now we're not going to get crazy with it and get it a really large area. We're going to just smooth out those edges, and then we're going to need to use a little bit of filler to fill this because this has a little bit of a ding in it. Now, it's not a large ding, it's not a large dent, so I'm not going to go to 80 grit sandpaper in order to put body filler over it. I'm going to use 180 with a glaze to smooth that out. So let's get to it. And to do that, I'm going to use this tool here. This is a tool I picked up at Harbor Freight. It's an orbital sander with a 2-inch pad on it, very small, and it's going to work perfect to sand this small area here. So if you're doing this at home, you don't necessarily need a tool to sand this out. You can do it by hand. All you need is a piece of 180 grit sandpaper or a piece of 80 grit sandpaper. Keep the area small and sand out this hard edge of paint. And then I'll show you how to fill it. So let's sand this out. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we've got this prepped out for some glaze. We're going to use some of this Roberlo crystal glaze. Shouldn't take too much. I'm going to put a thin coat over that area. So let's just mix a little bit of this up. That's probably plenty. I'm going to use a spreader that's about that wide because that's where I want that. I want my filler to be about that wide because we're going to block sand this. So we're just going to mix this up, press out any air pockets. Just before I lay it in there, I want to press out any air, if possible, get it as smooth as possible. And that's it. So now this is ready. After it cures, we're going to block sand it with 180 grit sandpaper and get it straight, and I'll show you how we do that. So now this glaze is ready to be block sanded flat and straight. I'm going to use this block. This is a hook and loop type block with hook and loop sandpaper. This is 180 grit sandpaper. You just put it on there and then we can block it out. Now you could use sticky sandpaper and any sort of block. You want it to be about the same size, maybe a little bit larger. But remember, this ding is only about this big. We've extended the body fill past the ding, which is one thing you want to make sure you do because you got to gradually block this down. So now let's go ahead and block it and we'll get it straight. Okay, so now that we have this thing blocked with 180 and it's pretty straight and flat, we want to remove those 180 grit scratches, so I'm going to switch over to 320 and block this a little bit with 320. Okay, so now that this is blocked with 320, it is very straight, pretty much perfect. We're going to go ahead and go around this with 600 to remove any other scratches that remain, any 320 scratches. We're going to try and get it all down to 600, and then we're going to prime it. Okay, so now this chip is repaired, this ding is repaired. We've got it all sanded and smooth, ready for primer. We're gonna clean this panel, mask off the areas we need to mask off, and then primer a small section of this repair. Remember, we wanna keep the primer as small as possible so we don't have to paint the quarter panel. Okay, so we got this all primered, and how I did that was I used the Roberlo ME1 and I turned my volume way down and I turned my air pressure very low, probably about 18 psi, and then I turned the spray pattern down to a fine spray pattern so I could just put a good coat on the filler but not have it go all over this panel. It's nice and refined. All we need to do is sand this smooth. We're gonna use 600 grit on that. I'm gonna go over it with the DA, and then we'll tape off this panel for paint. Now we're gonna sand this primer, it's dry. We're gonna use 600 grit sandpaper. You can do this by hand. You could use wet sanding paper, wet it down and use wet sanding 600 or dry 600. The goal is to sand it smooth so we can have a nice finish when we spray the paint. Okay, that's perfect now. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna go around all the edges. We're gonna mask this off, and I'm gonna paint down to that molding. But I need to go around all these edges and make sure they're sanded properly. I'm gonna sand them down with this 600 grit sponge pad. I'm not gonna have to press too hard. I just wanna use this flexible pad because it bends and it'll get into all the curves and contours of this body. Now I'm gonna go ahead and apply the first coat of base coat. We just wanna get this primer covered. I ran it at about 18 psi with 2 turns out on the volume. And I'm just being careful. I'm feathering the trigger just a little bit just to get a good coverage on there. Then I'm gonna let it dry and we'll put another coat on. So I'm hitting a couple other little spots here that I did repair. So this is some bonus footage for you. I did repair some damage on this other door handle, around this door handle. I'm going to cover this and clear that as well. I'm not real concerned about the blend at this point. I want to get that primer covered so it's not transparent. And I'm using the Segola 3300 GTO to paint this, and I'm also using Valspar paint. So I've let this dry for about 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and tack it off between the next coat. Now you're going to see me blend out just a little bit farther into that door. I'm still not going right up to the edge of that door because I don't want to get color right up against the edge. Now on this side I have to go right up against the edge, so I'm just doing the best I can. Okay, now I'm checking the coverage with my light, making sure there's no transparency there. We're tacking off both of these panels, and then we're going to apply one last coat of paint. We're going to put a drop coat on it. That's going to create a good blend before we clear. Okay, so now I'm just going to apply the final drop coat. We're going to blend it out farther into this door so we have a good color match. Now you may be spraying with an aerosol can with your color mixed up into an aerosol can. That's going to be fine. There's just some different techniques to spraying with an aerosol can. You want to stay a little bit farther away. It's a lot easier to run with an aerosol can. Okay, we're going to go ahead and apply the first coat of clear. The first coat of clear, you want to put on just a medium coat, get a good coat of clear on there so it's nice and tacky for the second coat. If you put a real heavy coat on, there is a better chance that it could react and run. So put a medium coat on and then go a little bit heavier on the second coat. And the same thing goes if you're using an aerosol can of clear. If you're going to use an aerosol can, use a good 2K urethane clear, but you do want to put on just a medium first coat. So the air pressure I'm using on this particular job with this gun is 20 psi on the air pressure. As far as the volume, I went 2 turns out from closed, and that really allows this gun to atomize very well and put out a very nice finish. So this is the second coat of clear here, and as you can see, I'm just going a little bit slower, putting it on a little bit heavier. My settings are all still the same. And as regarding the settings, those are all going to change depending on what kind of gun you're using, what temperature you're spraying in. There's a lot of different variables with that. So you just need to play around with it and see what's giving you the best results. So when you're spraying clear, you want to overlap 70%. You want to keep a consistent distance from the panel the entire time. You don't want to stop on a panel, and you don't want to start spraying on a panel. If you notice, I'll pull the trigger off the panel and then run across the panel. So if you notice when I'm making my pass, I'm running right off the panel, and then I'm starting again in the opposite direction. I'm not going to release the trigger entirely. I may feather edge it a little bit, but I'm basically going to keep that trigger pulled, run off the panel, and then do another pass. My first coat of clear was pretty light, so I decided to put a third coat of clear on. I really wanted to slick this out, and maybe I wouldn't have to polish it or buff it. So I did turn up my volume just a tad to 2.5 turns out on the volume, so more material was coming out, and it really slicked out nice. It came out really nice, and there was hardly any trash in it. There's a couple specks of trash that I'm going to have to cut and buff. And if you want to know how to cut and buff, you can check out the video at the end. I'll show you exactly how to wet sand and buff your panels. And if you have any questions about the work I've done here today, or just auto body or paint repair in general, leave them in the comments down below and I will answer them. Okay, so here's the finished product. This is the door. We had to paint right up against that panel, and the color match, I know it's hard to tell on camera, but it's exact. I mean, it was the same paint, so, but I was a little concerned about it, but the color match looks perfect. Let's check out the other side. So here's the other side. You want to make sure you pull that tape before it totally cures. So let's look at the damage here that we repaired. Right there was that chip. Totally gone. Color looks good. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a lot. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I appreciate each and every one of you watching. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. Click the bell so you don't miss anything. We will see you next time.